The steam from the kitchen enveloped me like a suffocating cloud as I pushed through the swinging doors, my feet already aching 3 hours into my shift. The clatter of dishes and barked orders faded into the dull roar that had become the soundtrack of my existence since Alessandro had vanished 6 months ago. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days to be exact. Not that I was counting. Table 12, Elena. VIP reservation, Marco, the floor manager said, thrusting a leather-bound menu into my hands. His eyes lingered on my midsection, where my apron strained slightly against my growing belly. And for God's sake, try to smile. This guest could buy the whole restaurant if he wanted to. I nodded mechanically, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The Stellato was Milan's most exclusive restaurant, a place where Italy's elite came to see and be seen. I'd only gotten the job through my cousin's connection, and every day felt like a test I was destined to fail. But the tips were good, and good tips meant I could afford the doctor's appointments I couldn't skip anymore. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged silverware on a tray, 26 weeks pregnant and abandoned, serving champagne to people who spent more on a single meal than my monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. "They've arrived," Marco hissed, materializing beside me. "The man is Vittorio Ricci." The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in Milan knew Vittorio Ricci, at least by reputation. Officially a businessman with interests in shipping and real estate. Unofficially, his name was whispered in dark corners, associated with things no one discussed openly. I'd never seen him in person, but the rumors painted him as both terrifying and untouchable. I steadied my breathing and pushed through the doors to the main dining room, my eyes immediately drawn to table 12 in the corner alcove. It was the most private spot in the restaurant, partially hidden by an ornate pillar and bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. 2 bodyguards stood nearby, their bulky frames barely contained by expensive suits, their eyes scanning the room with mechanical precision. And then I saw him. Even seated, Vittorio Ricci commanded the space around him. Broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that whispered of wealth rather than shouted it. His dark hair was cropped short at the sides but longer on top, streaked with just a touch of silver at the temples. But it was his stillness that struck me most. The kind of stillness that suggested he never needed to rush, because the world would wait for him. Across from him sat a woman so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her. Honey blonde hair cascaded over bare shoulders, her red dress clinging to a figure that belonged on magazine covers. She laughed at something he said, the sound like crystal glasses clinking together. I approached with my practiced smile, the one that never quite reached my eyes. "Good evening. Welcome to Stellato. May I offer you our wine selection?" The woman glanced up, dismissing me with a flicker of her eyes before returning her attention to her companion. But Vittorio didn't look up immediately. When he did, his movement was unhurried, deliberate. Dark eyes met mine, and the world stopped spinning. The wine list slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. Because those eyes, I knew those eyes. They had once looked at me with passion, with promises, with lies. Alessandro. Except Alessandro Visconti had been a mid-level manager at a shipping company. He had worn off-the-rack suits and driven a modest car. He had lived in a small but elegant apartment, where we'd made love and made plans. He had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a brief note about needing space, but Alessandro Visconti had never existed. Instead, here sat Vittorio Ricci, Mafia boss, legend, monster, staring at me with an expression of such shocked recognition that his beautiful companion turned to see what had captured his attention so completely. "Ellie?" His voice was the same rich baritone that had whispered against my neck in the dark, though now it carried a weight of command I'd never heard before. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, a protective gesture I couldn't control. His eyes followed the movement, widening almost imperceptibly as understanding dawned. The color drained from his face. "You're pregnant," he said, each word falling between us like stones into still water. His companion's perfect eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Vittorio, darling, do you know this waitress?" I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room began to spin around me as 6 months of grief, rage, and loneliness crystallized into a single perfect moment of clarity. The father of my child, the man who had abandoned me without explanation, was sitting before me with another woman. A woman who wore on her finger the kind of diamond that could fund a small nation. My voice failed me. What could I possibly say? That I had loved a ghost? That I was carrying the child of one of the most dangerous men in Italy? The bodyguards shifted, sensing the tension. Vittorio made a subtle gesture with his hand, and they retreated a step, though their eyes never left me. "Elena," he said, his voice softer now, intimate in a way that sent shivers down my spine. "I can explain." The woman beside him stiffened, her beautiful face hardening into something less perfect, but more real. "Vittorio, what is happening? Who is this?" I found my voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "I'm nobody. Just a mistake." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I forced them out anyway. "I'll send another server for your table." As I turned to leave, his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist with surprising gentleness. The touch sent electricity racing through my veins, awakening memories I'd tried desperately to bury. "Don't," he said, his voice carrying a command that stopped me in my tracks. "Stay." The woman across from him made a sound between a gasp and a laugh. "Are you serious?" "Vittorio, we're here to discuss our engagement party." "Who is this woman?" His eyes never left mine. "Francesca, I need a moment." "Go to the bar. Giovanni will accompany you." She didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on." Something shifted in his expression then. A hardening, a glimpse of something cold and dangerous that I'd never seen in Alessandro, but seemed perfectly at home on Vittorio Ricci's face. "It wasn't a request," he said quietly. The beautiful Francesca paled, then stood with a graceful movement that couldn't quite hide her fury. One of the bodyguards stepped forward, escorting her toward the bar. She went without another word, but the look she shot me over her shoulder contained enough venom to kill. And then we were alone as one could be in a crowded restaurant where every eye was now surreptitiously watching the drama unfold at table 12. 6 months, I whispered, trembling with emotions I couldn't even name. 6 months of thinking you were dead, or worse. 6 months of carrying your child alone. His jaw tightened. "Elena, you don't understand the danger you were in, the danger you're still in. My world is not a place for someone like you." "Someone like me?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You mean someone you lied to? Someone you used and discarded?" "No," he said, rising to his feet with a fluid grace that made others in the restaurant flinch. "Someone innocent, someone I wanted to protect." I took a step back, suddenly aware of how much larger he was than me, how much power radiated from him. This was not the man I had known, or thought I had known. "Well, your protection almost destroyed me," I hissed, tears burning in my eyes. "But don't worry, we don't need you. We never did." I turned to walk away, dignity the only thing I had left to cling to. I'd made it 3 steps when his voice stopped me cold. "Elena," he said, my name a command and a plea all at once. "If you walk away now, you'll never be safe again. Neither of you." I froze, one hand still resting on my belly, feeling the gentle kick of the life growing inside me. When I turned back to him, his eyes were fixed on that spot, a look of such naked longing on his face that it took my breath away. "What do you mean?" I asked, fear creeping up my spine. "I have enemies," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "Enemies who would use anything, anyone I care about against me. That's why I left, to keep you safe. But now..." He gestured helplessly toward my stomach. "Now everything has changed." Behind him, I could see his fiancée at the bar, her beautiful face contorted with rage as she watched our interaction. Beyond her, the restaurant had fallen into an unnatural hush, dozens of Milan's elite watching with undisguised interest as my world collapsed for the second time in 6 months. "Come with me," Vittorio said, holding out his hand. "Let me explain everything. Let me make this right." I stared at his outstretched hand, remembering how those same fingers had once traced patterns on my skin, had wiped away my tears, had promised forever without saying a word. Now they belonged to a stranger, a dangerous man who lived in a world I couldn't even imagine. And yet, the child inside me was half his. Whatever happened next would shape not just my future, but our baby's as well. With a shaking hand, I reached toward him, not quite touching but not pulling away either. And in that moment of terrible indecision, my past and future collided with the force of worlds ending and beginning all at once. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. The moment stretched between us, his hand extended in the space that separated our worlds. Behind him, I could see his fiancée whispering furiously to one of his men, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the bodyguard's sleeve. The restaurant had become a theater, and we were the main attraction. Not here, I finally whispered, drawing my hand back. Everyone is watching. Something flickered across Vittorio's face. Approval, perhaps. He nodded once, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a sleek phone. A few taps, and he was speaking in a low voice that didn't carry beyond our small bubble of tension. The private dining room. Now. Within seconds, Marco appeared at my elbow, his face a mask of professional calm that couldn't quite hide his nervousness. Mr. Ricci has requested the Medici room, he said, his voice pitched low. Elena, please show him the way. I swallowed hard, acutely aware of the weight of my situation. What about his companion? Marco's eyes darted to the bar where Francesca was now making a show of examining her diamond ring in the light. Mr. Ricci has made arrangements. Please, just do as he asks. The implied message was clear. Vittorio Ricci's wishes were not to be questioned, not even by the woman carrying his child, especially not by her. This way, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I didn't look back to see if he followed. The prickling awareness at the nape of my neck told me he was there, close enough to touch, but separated by 6 months of lies and a lifetime of secrets. We moved through the restaurant like a silent procession, me leading, Vittorio following, one of his men trailing at a discreet distance. I could feel the weight of stares, hear the hushed whispers. By morning, all of Milan's elite would be discussing the pregnant waitress who had brought Vittorio Ricci's carefully constructed world to a standstill. The Medici room was tucked away at the back of the restaurant, a sumptuous private dining space reserved for the most exclusive guests. Rich burgundy walls, a table of polished walnut that gleamed in the golden light of the chandelier, and windows that overlooked the twinkling cityscape of Milan. I'd never been allowed to serve here. This room belonged to Marco and the senior staff. I stepped inside, my fingers nervously smoothing the fabric of my uniform over my belly. Behind me, I heard Vittorio murmur something to his guard, who took up position outside the closed door. Then we were alone. Sit down, Elena, he said, his voice gentle but brooking no argument. You shouldn't be on your feet so much in your condition. My condition? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. You mean the pregnancy you knew nothing about until 5 minutes ago? He moved to the table, pulling out a chair not for himself, but for me. The gesture was so reminiscent of Alessandro, always the gentleman, always attentive to my comfort, that for a moment I almost forgot who he really was. Almost. Please, he said, and something in his voice made me obey, sinking into the chair while he took the one across from me. Up close I could see the changes 6 months had wrought, new lines at the corners of his eyes, a certain hardness to his jawline that I didn't remember. Alessandro had smiled often, laughed easily. Vittorio Ricci looked like a man who had forgotten how. You lied about everything, I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Your name, your job, your entire life. Was any of it real? His dark eyes met mine without flinching. My feelings for you were real. Everything else. He made a dismissive gesture with his hand. Alessandro Visconti was a necessary fiction, a way for me to escape, just for a little while. Escape what? Your fiancé? Your business? His mouth curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You know what I am, Elena, what I do. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Of course I knew. Everyone in Milan knew about the Ricci family, their control over the port, the whispered connections to activities that never made the official ledgers. I'd just never connected those rumors to the man who had held me through the night, who had made me tea when I caught the flu, who had talked about traveling the world together someday. Why me? I asked, the question that had haunted me since the moment I recognized him. Of all the women in Milan, why choose a waitress with nothing to offer? He leaned forward, his eyes suddenly intense. Because you looked at me and saw a man, not a name or a bank account or a useful connection. Do you know how rare that is in my world? I remembered our first meeting, a rainy afternoon at the small cafe near my old apartment. He'd been sitting alone, reading a book, and had offered me the only vacant chair when I came in drenched from the storm. We'd talked for hours about nothing important, about everything important. So you created a false identity to, what, experience normal life, and then when it got too real, you just disappeared? His jaw tightened. I disappeared because someone started asking questions. About me. About you. The kind of questions that get people killed, Elena. A chill ran through me. What are you saying? I'm saying that my world is dangerous. I have enemies who would think nothing of using you to get to me. When I realized someone had connected Alessandro to you, I had to end it. Immediately. To protect you. By abandoning me? My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. By leaving me alone and pregnant? Something flashed in his eyes. Pain. Regret. I couldn't tell. I didn't know about the baby. You have to believe that. The door opened suddenly, and one of his men stepped halfway into the room. Boss, Francesca is insisting on speaking with you. She's threatening to call her father. Vittorio's expression hardened. Tell her I'll call her later. This is not negotiable, Antonio. The man nodded and withdrew, but not before casting a curious glance in my direction. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, suddenly aware of how I must look. My waitress uniform stretched over my swollen belly, my hair coming loose from its practical bun, my eyes red-rimmed from fighting back tears. Your fiancé seems upset, I said, unable to keep the bitter edge from my voice. Francesca is not my concern right now, he replied, dismissing the beautiful woman with a wave of his hand. You are. You and... His eyes dropped to my stomach. A boy, I said softly, watching his reaction. I'm having a son. The change that came over his face was subtle, but profound, a softening around the eyes, a parting of lips, a stillness that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep inside him. A son, he repeated, the words almost reverent. He's active, I continued, pressing my hand against the spot where tiny feet were kicking, especially at night. The doctor says he's healthy, developing normally. Vittorio extended his hand halfway across the table, then stopped, uncertain. It was the first time I'd seen him hesitate about anything. May I? The request surprised me. I hesitated, then nodded, watching as he rose and came around the table to kneel beside my chair. Slowly, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything I now knew about him, he placed his palm against the curve of my belly. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, and Vittorio's eyes widened in wonder. For an instant, I saw Alessandro again, the man I had fallen in love with, the man I had believed would be by my side forever. I felt him, he whispered, and there was awe in his voice. Something inside me cracked at the sight of this powerful, dangerous man kneeling beside me, his hand cradling the life we had created together. Despite everything, the lies, the abandonment, the pain, I couldn't deny the connection that still pulsed between us, complicated now by the innocent life growing beneath his palm. His name is Matteo, I said, my voice catching. After my father. Vittorio looked up, his eyes meeting mine. A strong name. His hand remained on my belly, as if he couldn't bear to break the connection now that he'd found it. Elena, I need you to understand something. I left to protect you, but I never stopped. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I never stopped thinking about you, missing you. Before I could respond, the door burst open, and Francesca stood framed in the doorway, her beauty twisted by fury. Behind her, Antonio looked apologetic, a cut on his cheek suggesting Vittorio's fiancé had not taken her banishment well. So this is what couldn't wait, she spat, her eyes taking in the scene before her. Vittorio kneeling at my side, his hand still resting on my pregnant belly. You abandon our engagement dinner for your pregnant whore? Vittorio rose to his full height in one fluid motion, his demeanor changing so completely it was as if a switch had been flipped. Gone was the gentle man who had gazed in wonder at my belly. In his place stood someone cold and dangerous, radiating a quiet menace that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. "You will never speak of her that way again," he said, his voice soft, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made even Francesca take a step back. "Never." She recovered quickly, her perfect features arranging themselves into a sneer. "Don't be absurd, Vittorio. You can't possibly believe this. This waitress and her bastard have any place in your life. What would your father say? What about our family's arrangement?" I flinched at her words, one hand protectively covering the spot where Vittorio's had been moments before. Matteo kicked again, as if sensing the tension in the room. "My father is dead," Vittorio said coldly, "and any arrangement was between our families, not us. It was never my choice." Francesca's eyes widened. "You can't mean that. Think about what you're saying, what you're risking. For what? Some woman you obviously lied to, who means nothing?" Vittorio took a step toward her, and despite his lack of overt aggression, Francesca retreated until her back was against the wall. "She is carrying my son," he said, each word precise and weighted. "My heir. She will be treated with respect, or there will be consequences." The color drained from Francesca's face. "You wouldn't dare." Your father knows exactly who I am and what I'm capable of," Vittorio interrupted. "Don't test me on this, Francesca." The tension in the room was suffocating. I struggled to my feet, unwilling to remain seated while this drama played out around me. "I should go," I said, my voice small in the charged atmosphere. "This isn't my world. I don't belong here." Vittorio turned to me, and for an instant, I glimpsed something like panic in his eyes. "Elena, wait!" But I was already moving toward the door, needing to escape, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with threats and power plays, and the ghosts of lies past. Antonio stepped aside to let me pass, his eyes averted. "Let her go, Vittorio," Francesca said behind me, triumph creeping into her voice. "She knows she doesn't belong in your life. Let her crawl back to whatever hole she came from." I didn't hear Vittorio's response. I was already hurrying through the restaurant, past the curious stares and whispered comments, my cheeks burning with humiliation and confusion. I pushed through the kitchen doors, ignoring Marco's startled questions, and headed straight for the small employee locker room at the back. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my locker combination, desperate to grab my coat and purse and escape before Vittorio came after me, or worse, didn't come after me at all. I had just wrapped my coat around my shoulders when the locker room door opened behind me. I turned, expecting Marco with questions I couldn't answer, or perhaps one of Vittorio's men sent to escort me somewhere. Instead, I found myself face to face with Francesca, her perfect beauty now marred by the cold fury in her eyes as she closed the door behind her with a soft final click. "What do you want?" I asked, instinctively placing my hand over my belly as Francesca's gaze flickered to it with undisguised contempt. She smiled, a perfect arrangement of white teeth that never reached her cold eyes. "I want to offer you a deal, woman to woman." I glanced toward the door, calculating my chances of getting past her. Despite her slender frame, Francesca radiated a predatory confidence that made my skin crawl. "I'm not interested in any deals." 500,000 euros, she said, as casually as if discussing the weather. "Cash, untraceable, enough for you and the child to start over somewhere far away from Milan, far away from Vittorio." My mouth went dry. "You're trying to buy me off?" "I'm offering you freedom," she countered, taking a step closer. "And safety. Do you have any idea what Vittorio's world is really like? The violence? The constant danger?" She shook her head, golden hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. "You think what happened today was dramatic? Imagine living with that intensity every day for the rest of your life. Imagine raising a child in that environment." Her words struck a chord of fear that had been vibrating inside me since the moment I recognized Alessandro as Vittorio Ricci. I had spent the last 6 months imagining our future together, before he disappeared, but I had been imagining a life with a shipping manager, not a mafia boss whose name was whispered with fear. "Why would you offer me money?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "If you're so certain I don't belong in his world, Why not just let me walk away? Francesca's smile tightened. Because I know men like Vittorio. Once they fixate on something, they don't let go easily, especially when it comes to... She gestured dismissively toward my stomach. Legacy. Bloodline. It's almost primitive, really. And you think money will solve that problem? Money solves most problems, she replied with a shrug. Take the deal, Elena. Disappear tonight. Start fresh somewhere else, somewhere Vittorio won't find you. Because if you stay... Her voice dropped, becoming almost sympathetic. If you stay, you'll never know peace again. Neither will your child. Before I could respond, the door burst open. Vittorio stood in the threshold, his imposing frame filling the doorway. Behind him, I could see Antonio and another guard, both looking grim. Get away from her, Vittorio said, his voice quiet, but vibrating with barely controlled rage. Francesca didn't flinch. We were just having a little chat, woman to woman. I heard enough, he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. 500,000 euros? Did you really think you could buy off the mother of my child? A flush crept up Francesca's neck, but she maintained her composure. I was being practical, something you seem incapable of at the moment. Vittorio stepped into the room, and despite its small size, he seemed to claim the space, reducing Francesca's presence to something insignificant. Our arrangement is over. The engagement is off. Your father will be informed of my decision tonight. You can't be serious, Francesca whispered, her mask of confidence cracking for the first time. Our families have been planning this union for years. The connections, the business opportunities are meaningless compared to my son, he finished, cutting her off. Antonio will escort you home. Do not attempt to contact me again. Something shifted in Francesca's demeanor then, the polished veneer of sophisticated beauty falling away to reveal something harder, more calculating. You'll regret this, Vittorio. My father won't take this insult lightly. Your father is a businessman, Vittorio replied, unmoved. He understands that circumstances change, priorities shift. And she is your new priority? Francesca's laugh was brittle. This waitress? This nobody? She is the mother of my child, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps in his world it did. Francesca's gaze shifted to me, and the hatred in her eyes made me take an involuntary step back. This isn't over, she said quietly. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Antonio stepped forward, gesturing toward the door. Ms. Conti, your car is waiting. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, might continue the confrontation. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her red dress, and walked out with the dignity of a queen in exile. The guards followed, leaving me alone with Vittorio in the cramped locker room that suddenly felt much too small for his presence. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes scanning me as if searching for injury. Did she threaten you? I shook my head, overwhelmed by the intensity of what had just transpired. No, she just offered me money to disappear. I managed a weak smile. Apparently I'm worth 500,000 euros. You're worth everything, he said quietly, the words falling between us like stones into still water. I looked away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. You ended your engagement, just like that. It was never real, he replied, moving closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same scent that had lingered on my pillows for weeks after he disappeared. A business arrangement between families. Convenient. Expected. He reached out, hesitating briefly before placing his hand on my arm. Nothing like what we had. What we had was based on lies, I whispered, not pulling away from his touch but not leaning into it either. I fell in love with Alessandro. Not Vittorio Ricci. Pain flickered across his face. Alessandro was part of me, the part that could walk down the street without looking over his shoulder, the part that could sit in a cafe and talk about books instead of business. His fingers tightened slightly on my arm. The part that could love you without putting you in danger. And now? I asked, meeting his eyes despite my fear of what I might see there. Now that I know who you really are, now that I'm carrying your child, what happens to us? I protect you, he said simply. Both of you. No matter what it costs, no matter what I have to do. The intensity in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it awakened something I had tried to bury 6 months ago, the connection that had drawn me to him from the first moment, the feeling that despite all logic, this man and I were bound together by something stronger than reason. I can't just pick up where we left off, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Too much has happened. You left me, Vittorio, without explanation, without a goodbye, just a note saying you needed space. I left to keep you safe, he insisted, his hand sliding down my arm to capture my fingers. I had no choice. There's always a choice, I countered, though I didn't pull my hand away. You chose your world over me, over us. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Every day without you was torture. Knowing I could never see you again, never hold you, never explain, it nearly destroyed me. I looked down at our joined hands, at the stark contrast between his manicured nails and my work-roughened fingers. And what about your world now? Has it suddenly become safer for me, for our son? His jaw tightened. No. But I'm powerful enough to create a safe space within it. A fortress where no one can touch you. Where our son can grow up protected, never wanting for anything. A gilded cage, I murmured, remembering how free I had felt with Alessandro, wandering the streets of Milan, planning weekend trips to the countryside, dreaming of a simple future together. If necessary, yes, he admitted, not trying to sugarcoat the reality, at least until certain matters are resolved. I didn't ask what matters needed resolving. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. What about my life? I asked instead. My job, my apartment, my friends? You would want for nothing, he promised. Anything you desire would be yours. Except freedom, I said softly. He didn't deny it, which I respected more than empty reassurances would have been. Freedom comes with risks I'm not willing to take. Not with you. Not with my son. I pulled my hand away gently, needing space to think. The locker room suddenly felt stifling, the walls closing in around us. I need air. I need to think. Vittorio nodded, stepping back to give me room. Of course. My car is waiting outside. Let me take you home. To my home, I clarified, meeting his gaze steadily. Not yours. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. For now, yes. We left through the employee entrance, avoiding the curious stares of the restaurant patrons. A sleek black car with tinted windows waited at the curb, a driver standing at attention beside the rear door. He opened it silently as we approached, his eyes flickering briefly to my belly, before returning to some middle distance with professional detachment. Marco will be informed that you're taking a leave of absence, Vittorio said, as he guided me into the plush interior of the car. With full pay, of course, I sank into the butter-soft leather seats, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. I need that job. I have bills, rent. Those concerns are in the past, he replied, sliding in beside me. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing us in a cocoon of luxury and silence. You'll never worry about money again. That's not the point, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. I can't just become someone else overnight. I can't step into your world and pretend I belong there. He was quiet for a moment as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. You belong with me, he finally said, his voice low and certain. Everything else can be learned. I turned to look out the window, watching as the familiar streets of Milan slipped past. The city I had known my whole life suddenly felt different, as if Vittorio's presence had transformed it into something unknown and potentially dangerous. Where do you live? I asked suddenly, realizing I knew nothing about his real life. I mean, when you're not pretending to be someone else? A small smile touched his lips. I have several properties, a penthouse in the city center, a villa on Lake Como, an estate in Tuscany. He paused, studying my reaction. The villa is my favorite. Peaceful, private, surrounded by gardens. You'd like it there. I tried to imagine it. Me, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, living in a villa on Lake Como. The image was so incongruous it almost made me laugh. And where would we raise our son? In which of these properties? Wherever you feel most comfortable, he said, surprising me with his consideration. Though the villa would be safest, Isolated. Easy to secure. Easy to secure, I repeated, the reality of what that meant sinking in. Guards, security systems, restricted access. Yes, he admitted without apology. My son will have the best protection money can buy, as will you. And what about the rest of your life? I asked, turning to face him fully. Your business. The things people whisper about the Ricci family. Would our son be part of that too? Vittorio's expression hardened. My business and my family are separate concerns. Are they? Can they be? I pressed, needing to understand what kind of future he was offering. Your fiancé, ex-fiancé, mentioned your father, that this was about legacy, bloodline. Doesn't that mean you expect our son to follow in your footsteps someday? He was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was measured, careful. My father forced me into this life. I had no choice, no alternatives. My son will always have choices. Always. There was pain in his words, old wounds that had never properly healed. I found myself wanting to reach for his hand, to offer comfort, but I resisted the impulse. There was still too much unresolved between us. We're here, he said, as the car slowed to a stop outside my modest apartment building. I waited for him to make a comment about the neighborhood, the peeling paint on the facade, the narrow entrance where homeless people sometimes slept. He said nothing, merely studying the building as if committing every detail to memory. Will you come up? I asked, the question surprising me as much as it seemed to surprise him. His eyes met mine, searching. Are you sure? I wasn't sure of anything anymore. My world had been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. The father of my child had returned from the dead as someone I barely recognized. My future, which had seemed so painfully predictable this morning, was now a blank canvas filled with both promise and danger. But one thing I did know, I needed answers. Real answers, not the carefully edited versions he might give in the back of a luxury car, or the charged atmosphere of a restaurant. Yes, I said simply. We need to talk, really talk, about everything. He nodded, a tension I hadn't even noticed leaving his shoulders. Everything, he agreed. And there was a promise in his voice that made my heart beat faster despite all my reservations. As the driver opened the door and Vittorio extended his hand to help me out, I felt Matteo kick hard against my ribs, as if reminding me that whatever happened next would affect not just me, but him too. My son. Our son. I took Vittorio's hand, allowing him to support me as I stepped from the car into the cool Milan night, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, or taking the first step toward something I couldn't yet imagine. Either way, there would be no going back after tonight. My apartment looked smaller somehow with Vittorio in it. His tall frame and commanding presence seemed to fill the modest space, making the worn furniture and budget decor I'd once found charming seem shabby by comparison. He didn't comment, though his eyes took in everything. The small kitchen with its outdated appliances, the living room with my secondhand sofa, the narrow hallway leading to the bedroom. It's not much, I said defensively, setting my purse on the counter. But it's home. It's yours, he replied simply. That makes it valuable. The response disarmed me. I busied myself with mundane tasks, hanging up my coat, filling the kettle for tea, anything to give my trembling hands something to do. Sit down, I offered, gesturing to the sofa. I'll make us some tea. He moved to the living room but didn't sit. Instead, he walked to the small bookshelf where I kept my most treasured possessions. Dog-eared paperbacks, a few family photos, the ceramic bird my mother had given me before she died. His fingers trailed over the spines of the books, pausing at a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. You were reading this when we met, he said quietly, at the cafe. The memory hit me with unexpected force. Rain streaming down the windows, the comforting smell of coffee, the stranger with kind eyes offering me the last empty chair. You remembered. I remember everything about that day, he said, turning to face me. The blue scarf you were wearing, the way you laughed when I said I'd never read Jane Austen, how you insisted I was missing out on one of life's great pleasures. The kettle whistled, startling me. I turned away to prepare the tea, needing a moment to compose myself. By the time I carried 2 steaming mugs to the living room, Vittorio had finally settled on the sofa, looking both out of place and strangely at home. "Start at the beginning," I said, sitting in the armchair across from him, placing my mug on the coffee table. "Who are you, really? The whole truth." He cradled his tea between his hands, looking down into the amber liquid as if it might contain the right words. "My name is Vittorio Alessandro Ricci. I'm the head of the Ricci family since my father's death 3 years ago. Our family has interests in shipping, real estate, private security, and several legitimate businesses throughout northern Italy. And the illegitimate ones?" I pressed, unwilling to dance around the reality of who he was. His eyes met mine, unflinching. Protection, arbitration, moving certain goods through channels that avoid excessive taxation or regulation. "Criminal enterprises," I translated flatly. "By legal definition, yes," he acknowledged. "Though I prefer to think of it as operating in the gray areas where the law fails to serve actual human needs." I almost laughed at the elegant evasion. "And where does Alessandro Visconti fit into all this? Was he just a convenient disguise?" Vittorio set his untouched tea on the table. "Alessandro is my middle name. Visconti was my mother's family name before she married my father." His expression softened slightly. "She died when I was 12. Cancer. My father never remarried. The personal detail surprised me. It humanized him in a way I hadn't expected. So this alternate identity, it wasn't just a lie. It was part of you. The part I might have been in another life," he agreed. "The part that wanted simple things, a quiet afternoon in a cafe, a walk in the park without bodyguards, a woman who looked at me and saw just a man, not a name to fear or a connection to exploit. Until we met," I said softly. "What happened that day at the cafe? Was it planned?" He shook his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Pure chance. I sometimes went there when I needed to escape, a few hours where I could pretend to be normal. No one from my world ever frequented that place." His eyes met mine, and then there you were, drenched from the rain, looking for somewhere to sit, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Heat crept into my cheeks at the memory. "You offered me your table. I offered you my chair," he corrected gently. "I had no intention of leaving once you arrived." "And afterward? The months we spent together? Was that all calculated too?" "No," he said firmly. "I meant to walk away after that first conversation. I told myself it was too dangerous, too complicated, but then you mentioned meeting again the following week to discuss the book you'd recommended." He spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "I couldn't say no. And after that, I couldn't stay away." "Until you could," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Until you left without even saying goodbye." His expression darkened. "I had no choice, Elena. One of my associates saw us together in the city. Started asking questions about you. The moment anyone connected to my world became aware of your existence, you became a target. A target for what? For anyone who wants to hurt me," he said simply. "In my world, caring for someone is a weakness others will exploit without hesitation. I've seen it happen. Wives kidnapped for ransom, children threatened to force cooperation, lovers killed as warnings." His voice had taken on a hard edge I'd never heard from Alessandro. "I couldn't let that happen to you." I rested my hand on my belly, feeling Matteo's gentle movements. "And now? What's changed? I'm still the same person, still just as vulnerable, more so, with the baby. What's changed is that I now have the resources to protect you properly," he said, leaning forward. 6 months ago, I was in the middle of a restructuring within the organization, consolidating power after my father's allies challenged my leadership. I couldn't guarantee your safety then. His eyes held mine. I can now. The implication of what he'd done during those 6 months hung in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable. I didn't ask for details. Some truths were better left in the shadows. "And our son?" I asked instead. "What kind of life would he have? A protected one?" Vittorio answered immediately. "The best education. Every advantage. A father who would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. And if he doesn't want your world, if he wants something normal. Something flickered across Vittorio's face. Pain, perhaps, or longing. Then he'll have that choice. I swear it, Elena. Our son will never be forced into anything. I wanted to believe him, despite everything. The lies, the danger, the complex reality of who he was. I wanted to believe that the man I had fallen in love with still existed somewhere beneath Vittorio Ricci's polished exterior. I need time, I said finally. This is a lot to process. He nodded, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. Of course. But there's something you should know before you make any decisions. He hesitated, then continued. Francesca's family, the Conti family, they won't take the broken engagement lightly. They're powerful, with connections throughout Milan, and they know about you now. A chill ran through me. Are you saying they might hurt me? To get back at you? I'm saying you're no longer anonymous, he replied carefully, and that creates risks I can't ignore. Even if you decide you want nothing to do with me, I need to ensure your safety, so I have no choice, I said, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Either I accept your protection and everything that comes with it, or I arrange for you to disappear, he finished. A new identity, a new city. Enough money to support you and our son in comfort for the rest of your lives. His face was impassive, but I could see the cost of offering this alternative in the tightness around his eyes. You would never see me again, neither would he. The thought of raising Matteo without his father, of never seeing Vittorio again, created an unexpected ache in my heart. Despite everything, despite the danger and complications, some part of me still yearned for the connection we had shared. Would you really let us go? I asked, searching his face. If that's what I chose, it would destroy me, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. But yes, if that's what you truly wanted, I would let you go. His honesty touched something deep inside me. The man I had known as Alessandro had always been forthright. Sometimes painfully so. Perhaps that part of him, at least, had been real. I don't know what I want yet, I said truthfully, except that I want our son to be safe. To be loved. On that, we are in complete agreement, he said, a spark of hope lighting his eyes. Let me show you that I can provide both. Give me a chance to prove myself to you again. How? I asked, genuinely curious. How does someone like you prove themselves to someone like me? He seemed to consider the question carefully. Come to the villa. For a week. See the life I can offer you, the safety, the comfort, the beauty of it. If after that time, you still wish to leave, I won't stop you. I'll arrange everything as I promised. A week, I repeated, turning the idea over in my mind. No commitment beyond that? None, he confirmed. Just a chance to show you what could be, to answer all your questions, to let you make an informed decision about our future, yours, mine, and our son's. It was a reasonable offer, more reasonable than I had expected from a man who clearly was accustomed to getting his way in all things. When? Tonight, he said without hesitation. Pack whatever you need. My security team can retrieve anything else tomorrow. Tonight, I echoed, taken aback by the urgency. Why the rush? His expression darkened slightly. The Contis have ears everywhere. The longer you remain here unprotected, the greater the risk. Fear coiled in my stomach, but along with it came a strange sense of clarity. Whatever happened next, my life had already changed irrevocably. There was no going back to the simple existence I had known before. The only question was which path forward I would choose. All right, I said finally. 1 week. But I need your word that if I choose to leave after that, you'll respect my decision. No following me, no surveillance, no interference in our lives. You have my word, he said solemnly, though I will always ensure your financial security, regardless of your choice. I nodded, accepting this compromise. I'll need a few minutes to pack. Relief washed over his features. Take your time. My men are outside. You're safe now." The casual mention of men stationed outside my apartment should have frightened me. Instead, it offered a strange comfort, the first tangible evidence of the protection he had promised. I rose awkwardly, my pregnant body requiring more effort than it once had. Vittorio stood immediately, reaching out to steady me. His hand on my elbow was warm, familiar in a way that made my heart ache for simpler times. "Elena," he said, his voice soft. "I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive me for the lies, for leaving you?" I looked up at him, at the face I had loved as Alessandro, and now had to learn to understand as Vittorio. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'm willing to try." Something shifted in his expression then, a vulnerability I hadn't seen since our time together as different people. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his hand to my cheek, his touch light as a whisper. "That's all I ask. A chance." For a moment, we stood there in my small apartment, caught between the past we had shared and the uncertain future before us. Then Matteo kicked sharply, making me gasp in surprise. Vittorio's eyes widened. "Is he all right?" I laughed despite myself, guiding his hand to the spot where our son was making his presence known. "He's fine. Just restless, like his father, perhaps." As Vittorio's palm spread over my belly, his face filled with wonder once more. In that moment, he wasn't a mafia boss or a man of danger and power. He was simply a father connecting with his unborn child, and I was simply a mother watching them bond. "Hello, Matteo," he whispered, and the tenderness in his voice brought tears to my eyes. "I'm your father, and I promise you this, whatever happens, whatever your mother decides, I will always protect you, always love you, always be there for you, even if from a distance." The vow, spoken so earnestly to our unborn son, touched something in me that had been frozen since the day Alessandro disappeared. Maybe Vittorio Ricci was not the man I had fallen in love with. Maybe he never could be. But perhaps in time, I could learn to love the man he truly was. Complicated, dangerous, but capable of a depth of feeling I couldn't deny. "I'll go pack," I said softly, reluctantly stepping away from his touch. As I moved toward the bedroom, I paused at the threshold, looking back at him. He stood in my living room, powerful and uncertain all at once, watching me with eyes that held both the shadows of his world and the light of what we might become together. "Vittorio," I said, testing the name on my tongue. "I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if I can live in your world, with its dangers and its darkness. But I do know this, our son deserves to know his father. And I deserve the chance to decide what I can and cannot accept." He nodded, understanding the olive branch I was extending. "One day at a time, then? One day at a time," I agreed. As I turned to pack for a future I couldn't yet imagine, I felt Matteo move again, a gentle reminder that whatever choice I made wouldn't be just for me. Perhaps that was the greatest lie Alessandro had told, that I could be protected through abandonment. Some bonds couldn't be severed, some connections couldn't be denied, no matter how dangerous the consequences might be. Whether I ultimately chose to stay or leave, whether I could learn to love Vittorio as I had loved Alessandro, one truth remained undeniable. Our lives were irrevocably intertwined. For better or worse, our story was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. And as I packed my belongings, listening to Vittorio speaking quietly on his phone in the other room, arranging our departure to a world I had never known existed, I felt something unexpected unfurl within me. Not fear, not resignation, but a cautious hope. Hope that beneath the lies and the danger and the complications, we might find our way to something real, something lasting, something worth the risk. After all, the greatest loves are often those that challenge us most deeply. And ours, it seemed, was just beginning its most challenging chapter. Thank you all so much for following this story to its conclusion. I truly appreciate you joining me on Elena and Vittorio's journey. If you enjoyed this thrilling romance, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who might enjoy it too. Your support means everything, and allows me to keep creating stories like this one. Until next time.